Hello Internet, Taliesin here, and today we are talking cinematic analysis. Yes, it's that time again, the happy time. We are talking the aftermath of the Anduin boss fight. We are talking Mournblades and Syvanas and old favourites and the absolute final goodbye, but actually really though, probably, of Arthas Menethil. In a cinematic where I think it's fair to say everything comes in twos. The dual forces at work within the Young Alliance King, the two dads who help him survive, the two past lives that Syvanas is still trying to reconcile, the fact that this film marks essentially the first of two endings to the raid, and therefore Shadowlands with the final face-off against Zoval coming next week. It's a cinematic that arrives very much in two distinct halves itself, and of course, as usual these days, the events it depicts have divided the WoW community pretty much down the middle, and in this video we are going to be discussing it all. But the usual disclaimers apply. This is not a reaction video. I've watched this cinematic countless times already, and if you haven't seen it, this video is going to be a really bad way of watching it, because we're going to be stopping and starting and skipping bits and talking all over it, and generally just having a good old nerdy deep dive time. So if that sounds like your kind of thing, by all means join us as we ask, how exactly did Anduin break free of the jailer's grasp? What exactly does Syvanas and our Friends Forever gang think of it? And why you gotta go and do Arthas like that, dudes? Though, why though? Okay, go, 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 go.
Do you not understand? This one is bound to me.
So our cinematic begins where the Anduin boss fight ends, and I think it's probably good to give a quick reminder as to the main recent plot points leading up to this moment. Syvanas is awake now. You can see our video on that cinematic from back when it appeared on the PTR, and even though no one is especially happy about it, she helps us to get into the Sepulcher in the first place, which leads us to meet puppet Anduin, controlled by the jailer ever since Syvanas used the Mournblade that Zoval made, or rather adapted from Anduin's own Charlemagne, on him when he refused to join Team Spiky back at the beginning of the expansion. During this boss fight, the shade of Arthas Menethil appears and mocks Uther and Syvanas, confirming what has been pretty heavily hinted at since the blade was forged, that the soul used in its creation was indeed that of the former Lich King, who we last saw being tossed mercilessly into the moor by emo Uther in the Bastion Afterlife cinematic before Shadowlands began. Arthas' lines do sound like they could be voiced by the jailer though, so honestly it's hard to know if it really is Arthas consciously saying the words, whether it's the jailer speaking through him like he does Anduin, or whether it is essentially just a replay of past Arthas stuff manifesting. But either way, it is literally Arthas in the blade. He's an important part of the fight, and as we finally begin to overcome Anduin in the encounter, we see him frustratedly, almost petulantly fling some dark jailer magic at our heroes as the jailer gives himself some breathing space. His get my new meat puppet to kill them plan didn't work. It's time for plan B. Blow up the meat puppet and take everything else with you. Quite a lot to unpack in this frenetic opening. Firstly, the fact that Anduin's final bolt destroys the shield that Jaina is using to protect our Friends Forever gang, emphasized with this close-up showing us the tired and concerned grimace on the face of Jaina, which tells us that for the moment at least, the Planeteers are essentially defenseless. So if there were to be, for example, the complete annihilation of the encounter area by an exploding meat puppet, that would be very serious bad news for everyone. The shield disappearing and the impact and the look on Jaina's face establish the stakes here at the start. And because it's my video and I'm allowed to talk about whatever I want, let's take a moment to talk about Jaina's face, shall we? A, it's just great to see her doing some fighting, because you do forget, don't you, what an absolute badass she is, and she really looks like what she is here, a late 30s to early 40-year-old woman just being incredibly awesome. But the reason I bring it up is because it reminds me of something that I initially said back back in BFA with her initial redesign that I'm pretty sure the animators used Jaina's voice actor, Laura Bailey, as a reference when they animate this character. Something that I'm even more convinced of now, because never has Jaina Proudmoore looked more Laura Bailey than right here. And if you still don't believe me, consider that over the last couple of years, they've also made Syvanas look noticeably more like her voice actor, Patty Mattson, to the extent where in this cinematic, it's actually a bit distracting how closely they resemble each other. Likewise, they apparently use Gerard Depardieu as a reference for Anduin for some reason, but I think that's great. That's really great. And Zoval's line here is really important.
This one is bound to me.
It basically just tells you everything you need to know about our main antagonist in a nutshell, because the Jailer is definitely one of the most boring video game baddies of all time. You know I think that, but I can never understand it when people say they don't know his motivations, because he keeps on telling us, like every time he's on screen. The Jailer is all about ownership. Yeah, he wants to unmake the rules of life and death, and that goal is one that brings a lot of wronged and angry allies onto his side who want the same thing, like Helya and Syvanas. But the problem is that Zoval also wants to rule over the new thing, and that need for dominance is underlined by his confident ownership of Anduin here. This is just a powerful body to do with as he pleases. Anduin has no autonomy, no free will, not even his own voice. The Jailer owns it all. And as he thrusts Kingsmorn, or as I will always call it, Charliemorn, into the ground, and that now familiar black death magic starts to bubble out, it's interesting that it's Syvanas who calls out and runs towards him. More on that later. But she's too late, because he is engulfed by what the cool kids know is best raid mechanic in WoW history, Defile. We're not going to talk about Defile. I love how the camera runs in ahead of Syvanas and swoops through the fog to the eye of the storm within to allow us to share this next sequence with Anduin. And it's from here where a certain amount of media literacy is required.
Fulfill your final purpose. Annihilation. The fate of all who carry my blade.
Because I have seen a lot of discussion online about some of the things that happen next in this cinematic and how possible they are and what they say about the workings of the in-game universe and all kinds of other stuff. And I think it's important to discuss, starting with establishing the inside of the Defile Cloud to begin with. It's one of those things that is kind of happening, but also kind of not, you know? So Anduin is absolutely in the cloud. The Jailer absolutely is drawing his spirit and life into the Mournblade through his face like a Death Eater to annihilate everything around him. Zoval's voice absolutely is giving that big monologue, at least inside Anduin's head, about how Anduin only exists to fulfill the purpose he has decided on, how Kingsmorn is his blade. But importantly, I don't think we're supposed to think this is happening in real time as such. Like in the cinematic, from the time Anduin is engulfed to the moment he is free is 62 seconds. And you know, I don't think we're supposed to assume that Syvanas, Jaina and Uther are standing there for over a minute. Like, I hope he's okay in there. I hope he doesn't annihilate this platform, because there's no way we could possibly get away in time in 62 seconds. We'd be toast. No, in all likelihood, this action plays out in basically the time it takes Syvanas and Jaina to run to Anduin, which is essentially a few moments. So it's important to bear in mind that what happens in this sequence isn't necessarily meant to be taken completely literally, but that doesn't mean it's not interesting to talk about, because at this moment, Anduin is lost. He has succumbed completely to the Jailer's will, given up the fight to the extent that he is powerless to stop Zoval pushing the self-destruct button and killing him and all of his friends. But it's at this point that the Jailer makes his big mistake that doesn't seem very big at first, but which is the key to his undoing. At his moment of victory, the Jailer's need to own everything leads to him saying,
"The fate of all who carry my blade."
Zoval says that Charliemorn is his blade, And that flicks a tiny switch in Anduin's brain here, because somewhere in his hopeless, powerless state, he knows that's not true. Zovaal might have beaten Anduin into submission, but this blade is more than just his weapon. This blade has a legacy, a past, which reminds Anduin that he is not really alone. Because this blade doesn't belong to the jailer, it belongs to Anduin's daddy. Now, I warn you, this is about to get very fan-servicey, and your tolerance for that may vary. A golden hand lays gently on Anduin's shoulder.
My son, this blade does not belong to darkness. It was forged by valor.
And of course, Varian Wrynn is here for a big old pep talk. It's Varian, fam! But before we get into that, seriously, what is even going on here? Is this Varian's literal ghost? Like, has he been trekking invisibly through the Shadowlands, trying to find Anduin this whole time, and got here just at this moment? There is a really nice theory that the souls of its wielders might be stored inside Charlemagne, and thus kept from the Shadowlands. And that might be true, honestly. It's an idea I really like, and I'm not discounting it. But for now, and until that idea is proven in some way, it's probably safer to remember what I said earlier about not taking this scene literally, and assume that this is something that is happening essentially in Anduin's head, after all. And this convention of Anduin envisioning Golden God Varian has already been established way back in Legion, in the cinematic when the recently orphaned king recovered Charlemagne from the Broken Shore. And no one thinks Varian actually physically appeared on the Broken Shore in that case, or maybe you do. Like I say, I am open to the idea. It was a representation of Anduin drawing on the memory of his father and his legacy to find the strength he needed to overcome his own doubts and weakness. And that is exactly what's happening here. With the same sword, because Zovaal is wrong. Kingsmourn isn't his blade. It is a fabled weapon in World of Warcraft lore with a rich history that Anduin is aware of. Quick history lesson, fam. Charlemagne was originally two separate Night Elven blades, Elamain and Shalator, which were wielded by two different Varians. That's a long story, but yeah, there were two Varians, until they both had a fight with Onyxia, whose magic fused the two Varians back into one Varian, and also the two blades into the single Charlemagne. When Varian says here that
it was forged by valor,
he doesn't mean you can buy it from a PvP vendor. He's referring to the fact that it was literally forged while he was fighting a dragon. Or sorry, when both of him were fighting a dragon. Remember, this cinematic is all about duality. When Varian was killed by Gul'dan at the Broken Shore, Anduin recovered and took up the blade, and the light in the center turned golden, presumably to represent Anduin's power coming from the light. Although maybe now we have some other ideas about that. In BFA, Anduin lent the blade to Saurfang. Remember him? Who switched to Fury to dual wield it and basically beat Syvanas before she totally cheated with shitty death magic. And it's only after Zovaal decided that Anduin was his special boy that Charlemagne was reforged into Kingsmourn. The soul of, we now know, Arthas, replacing the golden light in the center. People have ragged on how Arthas was being used as a battery, but it's a little bit more symbolic than that. Obviously, Anduin's faith and comfort and literal power, the light, having been replaced by the remains of the jailer's most iconic servant. Arthas isn't a battery, he's more like the electricity in an electric fence. He's keeping everything locked down and in control. And you know what? It would have worked too, if only the jailer hadn't referred to Charlemagne as his, because that line reminds Anduin of where his inner strength comes from. And just like in the Broken Shore, that inner strength is manifested here in his mind's eye, in the shape of his father, to give him the inspiration he needs. But not just Varian, though.
it was forged by valor.
And also by honor.
Now look, I have to admit, this is the moment that I was totally sold on this cinematic, okay? Because I don't think anyone will have been surprised when Ghost Dad rocked up to help Anduin through his rough patch, but when Saurfang makes an appearance and the Anduin music starts blaring, the proper, good, heroic Anduin music after the awesome corrupted version that plays during the boss fight, man, that is the kind of feel-good, simple fan service I need and I deserve right now, and I will take it, thank you. Something I've been saying a lot recently is that I don't think WoW does enough victory laps in its narrative. Every plot beat is always setting up or teasing another future one, and Blizzard seem very reluctant to ever engage in a big, satisfying ending of an arc or thread, something Final Fantasy XIV has absolutely no problem with at all. And in fact, many players of that game will feel that the image of God Dad and Orc Dad laying their hands over Anduin's to give him the strength he needs, very familiar from the end of that game's Dragon Song War. And I am totally here for it. I approve. Because basically, it's just awesome to see Varian and Saurfang because they rock, and it is possible that these are the literal souls of those two stored inside the weapon that they both died wielding, which would be lovely, wouldn't it? But whatever the exact details, the purpose is that this is a visual representation of Anduin finding the strength within himself. The most important difference between Anduin and the Jailer, or even Anduin and Arthas, is that those two make everything about themselves. Arthas rejects the counsel of his mentors and the help of his loved ones. So Val doesn't need anyone and abandons his allies the second they've served their purpose. Anduin, though, draws his strength from his willingness to learn from and depend on others. Inspiration he gets from his admiration of others, and that strength is what wins the day for him here. Just as the Broken Shore cinematic predicted, and I'm not even joking, do you want to hear a line that's gonna make you shit?
They were his challenge to us, his people, to never let fear prevail, even at the very gates of hell.
Because here is Anduin at the literal gates of hell. And no, he is not going to give in to fear. And bear with me for a second, but Anduin breaking free of the Jailer's grasp is represented visually by him tearing the twin blades of Charlemagne apart, in a clear mirror of Syvanas tearing apart the Helm of Domination in the Shadowlands trailer. A neat callback, since one is enacting the Jailer's will, the other is defying it. Cool, but how's this for an even deeper metaphor? Anduin has never wielded Charlemagne as two blades before. He's only ever used them in their singular state. In fact, the only two characters that we've ever seen separate the blades are Varian and Saurfang. So, who are on hand to help Anduin in the moment Anduin needs to pull the blades apart? The only two people who have ever done it before. The power of legacy.
Its legacy and ours are with you, even here. Finished. Let it be finished.
And yeah, like everyone, I'd really like to see Anduin have a moment with his mum, Tiffin, as well, but you can see why this choice was made at this part of the story. So Anduin breaks free, and the clunk of metal as the only surviving part, the only real part of Anduin's admittedly very cool more armor, the literal collar falls to the ground. And like, the visual metaphor could not be any heavier here. And as Zoval's influence disappears from Anduin and Charlemagne, we see the golden light reappear in the center of each blade, representing Anduin's connection to the light re-establishing itself in the weapon. Or maybe the two spirits of Varian and Saurfang returning to their current home after a good day's work. Something that I really want to believe is true, just so I know that those two precious dads are safe and happy in each other's company, probably having awesome barbecues together as we speak. And we move on to the very distinct second part of this cinematic. Oh, refreshment break. I think most people, even if they didn't quite understand exactly what was going on in that first part with Varian and Saurfang and everything else, I think most people like that first bit. I think they appreciate having some cool triumphant closure on Saurfang, especially after his BFA death. And for me, I also think there's some great potential for Anduin going forward after being dominated Zovaal and the consequences that trauma might cause him. I always liken it to Captain Picard in Next Generation. He was captured and controlled by the Borg and did loads of heartless Borg stuff, which totally was not his fault, but the memories of being controlled like that and the things he did never really left him. And you know, it's not like it was mentioned every episode or anything, but every now and then we were reminded that Picard never forgets it. I'd be really interested to see that as something that gets explored with Anduin too. And that is where most other cinematics would probably stop, to be honest. But of course here, there's another important player to address. Ladies and gentlemen, finally, it's time for Arthas Menethil.
Arthas.
After all of the build-up, the years of Anduin parallels, the Jaina memories, the Afterlives reveal, the campaign flashbacks, the Pelagos, so it's possible he could be redeemed line, Invincible starts to play, and the most iconic character in Warcraft history makes his return, and...
Arthas.
He's a glowy blue blob now, and I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, are you f***ing kidding me right now? You gonna do Arthas dirty like this? Arthas! Instead of redemption or even a face, he's just an orb that these motherfucking wizards get to contemplate and monologue at for a bit?
Is this all that remains of him?
The last flicker of his scarred spirit, consumed in the forges of the jailer.
Bliss! And I can understand that reaction. I honestly can. And I'm sympathetic to it. And it was the first thing that Evie and I talked about when we talked about this cinematic together. And if you were dead set on seeing Arthas Menethil smile or sagely nod while Ewoks dance around him before he disappears into a happier afterlife, then obviously, yes, you're going to be upset and annoyed by this. I'm sorry. But Evie and I both agree, and I say that because I know you respect her a lot more than me, that for us, this is so much better than Arthas actually appearing. Oh, let me explain. I'm not saying that you are wrong or bad or whatever. If that's what you wanted and you feel cheated by this, I'm not saying that you don't understand the cinematic. I'm just giving my subjective opinion on a video game, all right? But I always said from the very beginning, ever since it was revealed that we would be coming to Shadowlands, that I hoped Arthas wasn't a big deal. Because his shadow naturally looms so large over this expansion. So many characters have important interactions and history with him. Naturally, his was the first name on everyone's lips when you say you're going to the actual afterlife. So he was always going to be a massive presence in the expansion without even ever needing to appear. That's definitely proven true, but I was worried that Blizz would be Blizz and would let him take over at the expense of the current characters. And this, the powerless, emotionless, unrecognizable remnant of a once great and terrible man, is so genuinely affecting for me. Because here's the thing, Arthas might technically appear in this cinematic, but this cinematic is not about Arthas. It's about the other characters here. Without wanting to put too fine a point on it, in a scene that many expected to be about Arthas having one last goodbye, what we get instead is victims of Arthas showing to various degrees how they have moved on. And I actually think that's kind of lovely. Arthas hasn't been cheated out of his ending. Arthas had his ending, and it was a really good ending. And if seeing him reduced to this is sad and kind of pathetic, it's supposed to be. But remember, this is not even really Arthas at all, but just a flicker of his spirit. It's not even really sentient, just the personality and emotionless scraps left over after the jailer was finished with him. And it is tragic in an expansion where one of the main themes is everyone's got the right to a chance at redemption. He has been cheated of that. And this just serves to remind us how merciless the jailer is, for sure. But by not having Arthas actually here, but the anima equivalent of like a bone or some hair or an old shirt that he used to wear, it helps to demonstrate how little influence Arthas has on these characters now. Some 15 years after most of their interactions even took place. Jaina came to terms terms with her Arthas pain and a whole bunch else in the awesome BFA storyline. She has forgiven herself and moved on. And the way that she's clearly more concerned with Anduin throughout this closing sequence is a really nice reminder of that. Likewise, we followed Uther throughout Shadowlands on his journey to come to terms with his betrayal and guilt over Arthas. He too has forgiven himself and found peace already at this point. So far, we have not seen Syvanas go through that process yet. And if she gets the spotlight and the lines and the moment here over those other two, then that's why. Because her calm and reflective response to seeing the last of Arthas Menethil in front of her is an important moment for the character that, let's be honest, was more wronged by Arthas than anyone. Which is why that line that I'm seeing get repeated online about this being, it's like if this were your funeral and all your friends and family were there, but the only one to speak is your accountant. It's so weird because, yeah, it's a zinger, but even the slightest bit of thought proves it completely wrong. Like, yeah, if you had killed your accountant in their own home and then forced them to be your undead murder slave and then made them kill all their own friends and family, and then you're like, hey, I know I did all that to my accountant, but why is everyone so hung up on that and all the other murders and dominations I did? It's my funeral. Say something nice about me. Don't let the accountant talk just because I killed her in her own home and made her my murder slave. It's my funeral. And also, this isn't Arthas' funeral. If I'm being completely honest, this lack of agency for Arthas and Syvanas' line,
no crown, no throne, not even a soul left for judgment,
makes me feel more sorry for Arthas than any actual appearance could have done. And I have to say, I know people will disagree with me on this, I really like Syvanas' speech here too.
I hated you, hunted you, and with each selfish act became you. That is my burden to bear. But your legacy is at an end.
And yes, I know you all have noticed it already, but Invincible transitioning into Lament of the Highborn is exquisite. I mean, the music in these cinematics is always majestic and usually a lot cleverer than people realize, but this is really something else. It's just magical. And what is Syvanas saying here? What is Blizzard saying? I've seen some people posit online that Syvanas is berating Arthas or like lording it over him in victory or something, but that's not what I hear at all. Syvanas isn't talking to Arthas. This blue blob can't hear her any more than an old tooth found in the earth can. Syvanas is talking to herself and indirectly to us. Just like Jaina and Uther before her, an important part of healing and moving on from their Arthas trauma is taking agency and responsibility in their own actions since. Syvanas objectively suffered unimaginable, unforgivable wrong at the hands of Arthas Menethil, but in accepting that the horrors she has committed since are part of her legacy, not his.
Will you accept her shattered legacy?
I must face the consequences, but your legacy is at an end.
Is liberating for her and also tells us, the audience, that this story, the story of Syvanas in Shadowlands, is not trying to tell us that we should forgive Syvanas the things she's done because she herself was a victim first. This isn't Syvanas winning against Arthas, it's her taking responsibility for the evil things she has done and acknowledging that while he casts a huge shadow, and he does, it is just a shadow, not a guiding hand. It's kind of like in Labyrinth, where Sarah tells Jareth, "You have no power over me." But while Sarah is freed by those words to go back home with her baby brother and have fun songs in her bedroom with terrifying puppets, Syvanas is now free to accept responsibility for and face judgment for the terrible crimes she has committed, which probably isn't going to be quite as much fun as Dance the Magic Dance, but you get my point. And honestly, if you think these last moments of the cinematic are berating or dragging Arthas in any way, then I don't know what to tell you, but I love of the quiet reflection that all 4 of the characters are going through here. People have complained that Uther and Jaina don't say much, and again, I'm sympathetic to that criticism. I hope they have plenty to say in dialogue in-game later. Jaina and Uther have already discussed Arthas together in-game dialogue after all, but I think that's okay for this cinematic. I know these characters. I know how they feel about Arthas because I've seen it in their own storylines. This particular cinematic wouldn't be made any better by them lining up to repeat those things to camera one more time. I can imagine what Uther is thinking here, remembering his student and the monster he became, as well as his own shame in casting Arthas into the Maw and to the mercy of Zaval. I can imagine how Jaina feels, and her pensive lowering of the head as the last flicker of Arthas disappears is far more impactful emotionally for me than her saying anything at all. And when Syvanas says,
"Begone then, Arthas Menethil."
she's not commanding him, she's just speaking to herself. When she says,
"May the last whisper of your name fade and be forgotten."
yes, it's a lovely callback to
The day you were born, the very forests of Lordaeron whispered the name Arthas.
but it's more showing us how this is Syvanas saying his name for the last time and moving on from the pain, just like Jaina and Uther have done. There is also the intriguing argument that it's the writers telling us that they are turning the page and moving on from the icons of Warcraft's past. And honestly, I think that's a pretty fair shout. Yeah, whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing. But the more I watch this cinematic, the more I like it. And the sadder it makes me, and the more I think it is as fitting a way of handling Arthas as you could possibly manage. And I know that some of you are going to write in the comments that I'm defending this cinematic, but I'm not defending anything. I'm praising it because I genuinely think this is really great, thoughtful, reflective, and in all the agency being on those who were wronged by Arthas, I think it's actually quite beautiful. I know lots of people will disagree, and you're not wrong, but you can't convince me that this isn't lovely. Just like I can't convince you that it's not terrible. That's how emotions work, sorry. I can totally understand the reservations that many people have about how cozy Syvanas is in the company of Jaina and Uther and Anduin, or rather, how cozy they are in her company, and I think that's a fair point. It does have more context with the preceding quests and also the exchanges and interactions between them in the raid itself, but yeah, I think overall, I'd agree there could have been more resistance, especially on Jaina's part. They show us that she's not happy about teaming up with Syvanas, but we don't get to live that unhappiness very thoroughly, you know? Overall though, it genuinely pressed a button in me that really needed pressing. In many ways, it's the most Warcraft cinematic that we've seen since the BFA trailer in just its pure Warcraftiness, you know? It made me feel good, and sometimes that's all I want from my fantasy entertainment. I want to see more WoW cinematics that give us endings, please, because I like this one very much. I want to end today with Syvanas as the final dregs of Arthas disappear. I've watched this so many times, and I will never not be moved by it. As the final sad strings of the lament plays out, as that handful of characters stand together, as Syvanas has just taken ownership of herself and who she is and what she's done, almost in defiance of the impact that he had on the course of her life, as Arthas Menethil evaporates into nothing, she can't help just the slightest flinch.
"Begone then, Arthas Menethil. May the last whisper of your name fade and be forgotten."
I will always love this moment, and you cannot make me not love it. Sorry. But whatever your opinion of the cinematic, I hope you enjoyed this video today. Let us know that opinion in the comments below, because on these videos in particular, I'm genuinely really interested to hear all of the opinions. I need them all. Feed them to me like a big juicy opinion peach. I am insatiable. I think it's very likely that the raid ending cinematic next week after Zoval is going to be a lot shorter, more actiony, and a whole lot less satisfying than this one, but I hope to be proven wrong. And I'll be honest, I am I'm looking forward to seeing how Shadowlands plays out with that and the Judgment campaign chapter afterwards. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you like this video, don't thank us. Thank our lovely patrons who give their actual real-life money to make all of our work even possible. If you didn't like it, downvote the shit out of it. Remember, my name is Patty Matson. No, my name is Taliesin, from me and Evertel and Anduin and Penny too. Until next time, cheerio!